Hey everybody, this is Miss Huval. This is part 2 of the video for English 3 AP, the rhetorical analysis of Last Child in the Woods by Richard Louv. Now in part 1, we kind of broke down the structure of his argument. Now in this part 2 video, I'm going to talk to you about if you were actually writing this essay, how you would go about structuring your paragraphs. Okay, so remember, on an AP essay, you're trying to convince the graders you don't need to take college English because you already know how to write. Okay, that's our main goal. And as you know, the essays are graded on a 9-point scale. In order to get to that highest band, that's 7 through 9, okay, you've got to show something they're calling complexity of thought. In addition to being able to handle really well structure, make sure you got a thesis, topic, sentences, enough evidence, you know how to, credit your sources, you know how to use in-text citations, you know that you're supposed to use quotations, you know that you got to have a concluding sentence, you know you're supposed to speak objectively, you're not supposed to say, I think this, I think that, you. In addition to mastering all those things, they want to know, can you look at something, slice it and dice it, and put together something almost instinctively. Okay, so that's what we're trying to master now. We're trying to get you to that complexity of thought, 7 through 9. I've mastered the art of reading something, slicing and dicing it, and putting it out there in an organized and coherent fashion. Okay, so all the things you've been learning about essay writing have to come together instinctively. And that's why I make you write so many of them, even though you don't like it, right? Okay, so if we're writing this in 40 minutes, I'm looking probably at 4 paragraphs. Maybe you can slip in a third body paragraph that's kind of short, but I would shoot for 4 well-developed paragraphs. Your first, of course, is your introduction. Your last is your conclusion, and you need 2 really meaty body paragraphs. So what you're trying to figure out is what 2 things are the most important things. Okay, now if you pick out that there's a metaphor on line 62, all right, that's good that you can find the metaphor, but is that the most important rhetorical device that he uses in order to achieve his thing? Can you write a whole paragraph about one little metaphor? I don't know about that, all right? So you want the big picture. What is he using big picture-wise to make his point? Richard Louv. In this particular piece. And mind you, we're not calling him Richard, okay, because he's not your friend. We always got to call people by their last name, Louv. You call him Richard Louv, or you could just call him Louv, and I'm assuming that's how you say his name. All right, so what are the big picture items that we have to choose from in this particular nonfiction passage? All right, I picked out a few things. Tone is huge here, because he actually has a tone shift. And whenever there's a tone shift, that's like the jackpot of things to talk about, all right? He starts out kind of cynical and kind of bumming out about things, all right? And then he totally changes to a nostalgic tone when he's talking about when he used to be sitting in the back seat and how it used to be. All right, so and when you have a tone shift, that's going to be a gold mine of things to discuss. First, you have to prove the first tone is there. Then you prove the second tone is there. And whenever you're using tone in a rhetorical analysis, you have to say exactly what the tone is. So you can't just say he uses tone to blah, 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 blah. No, what tone is it? So he switches from cynical to nostalgic. So you got to prove it's cynical. And you've got the example, let's see, what am I doing? You've got the example of the rear seat entertainment center, okay? And then you've got the rhetorical questions in line 43 to 47. And you'd ask yourself, how do those show his cynicism, okay? And you'd have to explain that. Then you've got the nostalgic tone that he ends up with. And he uses imagery there at the end from 63 to 74. And he also calls the backseat scenes that you see the drive-by movie in line 56. All right, so let's take a look at some of those examples. If we're trying to write a paragraph about tone shift, we've got to establish the fact that he uses a cynical tone. All right, what out of that rear seat entertainment example gives us a touch of cynicism? Well, take a look at line 33. It says rear seat and in-dash multimedia entertainment products, as they're called, are quickly becoming the hottest add-on since rear view mirror fuzzy dice. The target market, parents who will pay a premium for a little backseat piece. Sales are brisk. The prices are falling. Some systems include wireless infrared connected headsets. The children can watch Sesame Street or play Grand Theft Auto on their PlayStation without bothering the driver. So what in that to you points to cynicism? Okay, probably that last part, without bothering the driver. Like you don't want your kids bothering you. Like you're their parent. This shouldn't be bothering you. This is your job, right? Okay, so that would be something we could explain. Our main rhetorical device would be tone. We've established that the tone is cynical through the use of an example. Okay, and you could point to specific words. Bothering might be a good one. Okay, now let's look at the rhetorical questions in lines 43 to 47. And I read these to you in the last video. Why do so many Americans say they want their children to watch less TV, yet continue to expand the opportunities for them to watch it? More important, why do so many people no longer consider the physical world worth watching? The first rhetorical question there is definitely points to his cynical tone. Okay, so now that we want to prove we've got a nostalgic tone, let's look at the imagery in 63 to 74. Line 63 begins, well, actually it's in the middle of line 63. He says, we saw birds on the wires and combines in the fields. We were fascinated with roadkill, and we counted cows and horses and coyotes and shaving cream signs. We stared with a kind of reverence at the horizon as thunderheads and dancing rain moved with us. We held our little plastic cars against the glass and pretended that they too were racing toward some unknown destination. We considered the past and dreamed of the future and watched it all go by in the blink of an eye. Okay? So you've got imagery there. What's the most powerful image that stands out to you there? Maybe it's the thunderheads and the dancing rain. Maybe it's the kid holding a little toy car against the glass. Maybe to you that's the most powerful image. You pick one. You don't have to write about 7. You can pick one. Okay? And this is the key thing. Your image has to connect to nostalgia. Okay? So maybe the most beautiful image would be the thunder and the rain. But maybe the most nostalgic image would be the little car on the glass, right? For sure. Okay, a second thing that contributes to the nostalgic tone might be the drive-by movie in line 56. Okay, so this would be a paragraph. And I also thought that ethos could be brought in here if you wanted to ditch some of this other stuff and talk about ethos. His credibility comes from where? He seems to really care. He seems to really be invested and really think that these interactions with nature are very important formative experiences for these kids. So I thought about that too. Okay, so this would be a paragraph, all right? And we talked about nesting smaller rhetorical devices inside of larger ones. And so your big one would be tone. And then your smaller ones would be these. And would you need to put all 4 in your paragraph? Probably not. That's a lot. But these are things that you could choose from. Okay, so that's how you would structure that paragraph. And then at the end of the paragraph, in your concluding sentence is a great spot to do it. You would come back and tell how this cynical tone, how this tone shift relates back to his purpose. Okay, so he gets this nostalgic tone. He starts out with a cynical tone, and this relates to his purpose because he really thinks that the way we are embracing technology and rejecting nature is going to have a negative impact on people in the future because their imaginations are going to be stunted, They're not going to have a connection with nature, and it's going to make people different. And he thinks different in a bad way. Okay? So don't forget, you can't just prove that there's a tone shift. That tone shift has to be related directly back to whatever purpose you've established. Okay? And he gave you a hint. The AP writers gave you a hint there. They're telling you that his argument is about the separation between people and nature. So there you go on that. Now, I was thinking about pathos too. But if you do pathos, you're going to end up intersecting with tone. Almost always. Because tone is almost always based, or at least has some connection to the emotional impact that what the writer says has on the audience. So pathos would be a whole nother thing that you could talk about. But I think that if you talked about that, you wouldn't want to talk about tone also. But under pathos, you have to ask yourself what emotion. You can't just say the author uses pathos. You'd have to say the author uses pathos to elicit some sort of reaction on the part of the audience. And maybe that reaction is nostalgia, fear of losing our connection with nature. Those are emotions. Nostalgia is an emotion and fear is an emotion. And then you could use the dialogue between the lady at the car dealership maybe and the allusion to the whatever kind of wagon that is. I'm not really sure how to, I imagine it's one of those old covered wagons. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. So if you want to do pathos, that could be a whole paragraph. Then you wouldn't do the tone, and you could support that with the allusion to the covered wagon, which is on lines 58 to 59, and the dialogue between his friend at the car dealership, which is in that first column down there at the bottom. Okay? So that's pathos. Another thing we could talk about is logos, which is the evidence that he used. We were talking about this in part 1 of the video a lot. Okay, so the way he builds his argument is to give examples. And if you're going to focus on your other paragraph on the second half, okay, the drive-by movie and his imagery out of that last section, then you're going to want to avoid that. You don't want to double dip on that and be talking about the same part over and over and over again. So if you're going to use logos as your second paragraph and use the sorts of evidence that he accumulates, then you would want to stay away from the second half and focus on the first half, which I think you can very easily do, because there's 2 main examples that you could talk about. The number 1 is the nature and the advertising, and number 2 is the lady in her car shopping. Okay? So you could say, okay, he builds his argument through the use of evidence. The sort of evidence he uses are examples and anecdotes. The lady at the car dealership is an anecdote. It's a story. Okay? You got to remember that word, anecdote. And then example is you could use the nature and the advertising. Okay? And there are 3 things inside, 3 examples that you could pick from. You wouldn't need to use all of them, but you could use 1 or 2. Stamping a logo on the beach is a pretty powerful example. And then having parks to be sponsored by businesses is pretty powerful one also. Okay? And then, of course, if you talk about your anecdote, that would be car shopping there. And an anecdote is a rhetorical device, and an example is a rhetorical device, and logos is a rhetorical device. So if you discuss those 3 things in 1 paragraph, that would be a lot of rhetorical devices. Right? Okay, but remember, if you're going to make a paragraph about pathos, or you're going to make a paragraph about logos, it's all got to be related back to the purpose. So how does this appeal to emotion relate to his purpose? Well, if you're afraid you're going to lose your connection with nature, then you are going to heed the examples that he's given you. You're going to say, oh my gosh, we don't want parks to be a place that is used to advertise. We don't want a sponsor for the park. We're going to pay our taxes. We're going to advocate for parks being advertising-free zones. We don't want our beaches stamped with logos. We want our beaches to be beautiful places where we go to commune with nature. So you have to connect. How does that emotional appeal relate back to his purpose? It's going to inspire people to reject the use of nature as a place to advertise for capitalism's advancement or something like that. You can make it sound good. How does this evidence convince us that his purpose is good and true? You know, how does that evidence work to help him achieve his purpose? Well, we can definitely identify with the backseat car thing, because all of us have experienced that. Even now, looking at our phones in the car, you can spend a really long time getting lost in your social media and not even notice what's passed by on the highway. So we just got to remember all the time to be relating this back to the purpose. All right. Now, I didn't get a lot of outlines or a lot of ideas from my first video on the rhetorical analysis. But if you didn't, take a stab at jotting down a few ideas the first time. Try to write a few ideas down about this. Maybe write one body paragraph and send it to me. And let me look at it and see if you're on the right track. Don't forget your in-text citations. Don't forget a very powerful topic sentence. Use a quote in there. A nice concluding sentence that relates everything you said in the paragraph back to the purpose. How does this rhetorical device, or these rhetorical devices, how do they help to prove the author's purpose? All right, everybody, that's it for now. I hope you have a great day. I hope you're doing well, and I hope I get to see you soon. Bye.